Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I'd like to talk about amulets and other similar charged items. Talk a bit about definitions, but also try to show how we need to think very carefully about the objects that we encounter. Whether we are browsing in a flea market, observing a person, on an archaeological dig, or recording a house, or indeed triaging a collection bequeathed to a museum. How do we recognize these significant magical items? So, to start off with, what are amulets or talismans or charms? If you look in various different books, you get various different definitions, and some of the popular books can leave you quite confused, in fact. I'm actually going to take a practitioner's perspective here. And these definitions I'm putting here are fairly clear ones, but taken or adapted from a British witch and magical practitioner, Marion Green, who's a quite well-known author in the magical community in the UK and beyond. A charm is an object that's found, made, or adapted that brings good fortune, but it can be a representation of an object that we feel brings good fortune as well, such as the little claw hammer charm on the picture there. It may be charged with power from a particular place or particular tradition, and or indeed a particular event or time. The hagstone on the right obviously has lots of different traditions associated with it. And like a spoken charm, it can be charming and enchanting. And I'll come back to spoken charms in a moment. Now, an amulet is about protection from harm, or indeed bringing good fortune or prosperity. It's there for indefinite use, not for a specific one-off purpose. And it can be or be empowered by sacred text, symbolism, or other esoteric means. And it can be quite simple, like the holy stone. Hang up a holy stone or hag stone in the barn, protect your animals. Or it can be something heavily crafted, such as the Hand of Fatima on the right. I'll be coming back to some of those charms against the evil eye, but look at those eye charms in the middle there. Not only have they got a heart-shaped bead with the eye on to deflect the evil eye, they also have a little plastic representation of a bunch of grapes for good fortune, prosperity. And then there's the talisman. Some of the books you look at, the popular ones at any rate, you get very confused because, amulet's this, talisman is that. But they go through the same sort of complicated procedures for both. But really, a talisman is something made with expert esoteric knowledge for a specific need. And it can use earthly, heavenly, or intermediate powers. It's complex. They're highly variable and consecrated, according to your belief system, to be effective, particularly under specific circumstances. And they tend to be destroyed when they're successful. Effectively, a talisman is a complicated spell, and spells can be woven into many things, which is why I've not put a picture there of an obvious talisman, but something that is woven, a witch's chaplet. It could be a basket, it could be a piece of clothing. At the end of the day, there's so many overlaps between a charm and an amulet and a talisman. After all, a really complicated talisman could be simply for protection. And a spell. Talisman's a complicated spell. A spell and a charm overlap. So you've got that already, you've got the blurring of boundaries there. But it's more than that, much more than that, because there are threads running through it, empowering these objects. You take your material and you use craft. You use words, and you maybe do so in a ritual or ceremony. Symbol is important, whether that's the symbol of the hole in a hagstone or complicated sigils that go onto a talisman. And these derive from story, myth, tradition, including scripture. And an important aspect is the correspondences that you use, whether that is in terms of putting something together at a particular astrological time, using particular colors, or even more complicated talismanic work. And all of this comes down to belief. And it's charged, magical charge, whether that's emotion, purely emotional, whether that's a complicated ritual. There's magical charge that goes into it. But overall, belief is the most important. Now, I'm not talking about belief in a deity necessarily, it could be, but particularly belief in the efficacy of the object, whether that is that it will work because it's a complicated thing that you know will work and the cunning man down the road says it would, or whether it's because it's got a picture of St. Christopher on, or the Virgin Mary, or it's got verses from the Quran in it. You believe it will work. That's how that allows it to work. So I'd like to take a few examples, most of them from the Icony collection. And here are some livestock amulets from the Swat Valley in the north of Pakistan. There's a very strong tradition of wood carving in the Swat Valley. And these would be carved and hung around the neck of livestock. The individual designs, like the one on the right, I understand would be give some indication of the livestock owner. But the critical thing is on the back, where a hole, after carving, a hole was made in the object, and inside there would be something sacred. That could be verses from the Quran, it could be dust from outside a mosque or from a other holy place. Something that is considered sacred to empower and charge that as an amulet for protection. And then the hole is stopped up to keep it in there. Moving over to Christianity, medieval Christianity here, is an ampulae, which Diane mentioned, little lead containers for holy water. They're a special kind of pilgrim token. You go on pilgrimage, you go to the shrine, and depending on the size of the shrine, you either got to be close to the reliquary itself or perhaps see it from afar, and you get your token for a whole variety of reasons. Now, it may be that it's just a souvenir, and maybe this is the origin of the modern souvenir that we get on holidays. But these were good luck charms. They brought particularly the ampulae with a little bit of holy water in from the shrine. You bring it back to your community and make use of that holy water for healing or blessing the fields. Many, many these ampulae are found by metal detectors in plough soil. And there's a strong, well, no one wrote about it at the time, but there's a very strong theory that they were broken open in the past and the water poured out on the land. Equally, some of them were used, as Diana said, to enhance domestic books of hours and so on. There are even some that have been fused into church bells. So they can have a votive offering as well. They can have a practical apotropaic value in that in times of conflict, in certain places, wearing a pilgrim token, whether it's an ampulla or a badge, would actually give you safe passage. So yes, good luck charms, amulets, tertiary relics, devotional objects, guarantors of safe passage, a complicated object. And if you find one of these, you feel lucky even today. And then, of course, the evil eye. I mentioned these little tokens that are actually freebies in a Turkish restaurant. And again, thinking of boundaries. often popularly, we might think of the eye charms or amulets as being Greek, but actually they've got the same things in Turkey. And there are so many things that overlap our boundaries, but yeah, and they're the same. And of course, as I say, you've got the little plastic representation of bunches of grapes. Plastic, yes, but if you believe in it, that can still work. And on the left there, a hand of Fatima from Egypt, nicely made. You hang it up, brings all the good fortune and deflects the evil eye. On the right, another example from Morocco this time, unusually perhaps upright hand, but you know, there are plenty of those around. And this is made in tiles and clearly emphasizing the good fortune, prosperity. You've got the fish, you've got a goat, which you know is prosperity. If you have your goats, you've got great assets. But this actually comes from the collection of an East Anglian magical practitioner. He had it hanging in his kitchen. It was glued onto cardboard, which shows that, yes, whilst fine materials can be important, if it works for you, then it works. But also, Michael was very interested in the darker aspects of traditional witchcraft. And a lot of the collection that bequeathed to the Icony collection from him was, yeah, it looked in that direction. And this is another lecture, so I won't go into it, but within some aspects of traditional witchcraft, the devil is important, not Satan, the devil as a folk trickster. And there's a link to goats. So there's a strong possibility that what Michael saw in this wasn't just the hamsa, but was also that horned figure of the goat, prominently displayed as a bringer of good fortune. So again, what are we looking at in the context of who actually owned or used it? And here's an interesting one, a St. Christopher amulet. Now, St. Christopher pendants are really common, particularly in Britain. Find them flea markets all the time, but this one's unusual. Unfortunately, we don't have a provenance, but we can tell things from it. It's a pendant from made in Italy. It's got that stamped on it, so we can tell, and it's attached to a coin. Now, putting a hole in a coin and hanging it around your neck or attaching it to clothing it's a worldwide tradition. Apologies, a little dog bark there in the background. A whole lot of associations to do with the symbolism of the coin, the brightness of the coin, and so on and so forth. But this is Ceci, please. Sorry about that. But this is a UK half penny. Ceci, stop it. From 1965. And if you look very closely, you'll see that the hole has been made, hot punched by the look of it, in the place that actually does least damage to the ship. Now, that may be an accident, or it may be entirely deliberate. Could this be something made specifically for a voyage of some description? Was it to do with a person that was born in 1965, or was the voyage made in 1965?
5 minutes.
Just an artifact of the coins that were available? We don't know, but it's an intriguing find and clearly something very special. And lastly, I'd just like to really put the cat amongst the pigeons. The Venus, so-called, of Willendorf, so long discussed as obviously a goddess figure, but one very strong theory is that she was actually a birthing amulet, that you'd hold her when giving birth for safe childbirth. So what are we looking at? So just to sum up, don't fixate on classifications. There's loads of boundary crossing. Materials and design, they're less important than belief in the efficacy of the object. The symbols, correspondences cross boundaries, but different people have different perspectives, even within a culture. One person's protective amulet is another person's lucky charm, and for another person, just decoration. But if you are dealing with these objects, perhaps in a museum, collection, or academically, what can your knowledge of the owner or maker, if you know who they were, what can that tell you about the meaning and use they put this object to? And when you are sorting through items, perhaps triaging in a museum, allow time for reflection, going back and say, well, maybe that actually, I found that out. Maybe this is relevant. And do use multiple object names to catalogue so that people can search. And on that note, this is not something I've been involved with, but Christina Oakley-Harrington is working on guidance for better terminology for use in museum catalogues to describe magical objects. And I will put this link in the chat in a minute because I think it's quite an important piece of work that she's doing. Anyway, thank you for listening.